I'm happy to be here today to introduce our panel on book deserts in Detroit. This discussion is part of an ongoing series of exhibitions and lectures that we call Art as Social Force. Inspired by Mike Kelly's mobile homestead, which is at the house in the backyard that you may have seen, we've embarked on a multi-year examination of artists who seek to establish participatory and socially transformative art. Known primarily as social practice, its practitioners freely blur the lines among art making, performance, political activism, community organizing, environmentalism, and investigative journalism, creating a deeply participatory art that flourishes outside the gallery and museum system. So that's your short definition of social practice. An art is social force. How many of you are familiar with Mike Kelly's mobile homestead? You know what I'm talking about. As I said, it's this white suburban-looking house that's kind of out in the backyard of MOCAD. But what it is a permanent work of art created by the artist Mike Kelly, who is one of the most influential artists of our time. He's not necessarily a household name right now. People in the art world probably all know him very well, but if you haven't heard of him, he's worth looking into. He is so smart and works in so many different media. He's absolutely one of my favorite. And as I said, hugely influential on artists working today. So anyhow, he created this replica of his childhood home. He grew up here in Westland, Michigan. And he created this replica to be a community gathering space and gallery. And so we have a series of different exhibitions that go on out there. We have public programs. The spirit of the piece is that the community can come to us and tell us what they'd like to see happen in the mobile homestead, and then we try to make that happen. So we have AA meetings and, just all kinds of things going on out there. So the exhibition that's happening out there right now is Little Library Originals, a collision of art, literacy, and community. It features 13 miniature libraries created by Detroit artists, and there are hundreds of books out there that are free to take. Please go take books. And this exhibition was curated for us by Kim Kozlowski, and she's the founder of Detroit Little Libraries. The exhibition aims to encourage reading and community cohesion in Detroit while providing opportunities for visitors to interact with literary culture and the written word in engaging ways. So we're really pleased here at MOCAD to have been working with Kim and to have her curate this wonderful show for us. And we're really pleased to have her here today to introduce the panel. So please join me in welcoming Kim.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, MOCAD and the Mobile Homestead and the staff here for having us here for our exhibition. It's been an honor and a privilege to be here, and we're thrilled to have our panelists here today. Before I introduce our moderator, Mary Catherine Harrison, I just wanted to share with you how this all started. My husband and I put up a little free library in front of our home. I live in Ferndale, and we put it up, we put some books in there, and I just couldn't believe what happened in our neighborhood. People started coming out, they started talking to us about books they were reading, but they also started talking about stories about their lives. So we started getting to know our neighborhood after having lived there for 10 years. And we decided, after seeing a couple of the little free libraries along the riverfront, that there should be more in Detroit. And it was shortly after Detroit was getting out of bankruptcy, and there's been this enormous hope for the city, and we thought it'd be great to be putting up these libraries so we could increase books in the communities, because we all know here, and the reason why you're here is because books change lives. Reading changes who you are and your whole trajectory in life. So we've been raising money, and with a number of partners, we put up about 150. Last summer, we asked 13 artists to take their artwork and put them on libraries that are currently over in the mobile homestead. We'd love it if you went and visited after today. But in the process of all this, trying to get up the libraries, I'm a reporter at the Detroit News, and I cover higher education. And a study that is often cited in literacy circles is there's one book for every 300 children in low-income communities. And I looked at that study. It was done quite a while ago. And I looked up one of the authors, and turns out she was a University of Michigan professor. So I emailed her and asked her if she'd ever looked at Detroit. It turns out she had just recently. She looked at Detroit, she looked at Los Angeles, she looked at Washington, D.C., and she did a study with some other authors, and it's currently in publishing. But it did show similar disparities, not nearly as high, but about one book for every 42 children in Hamtramck and one for every 12 children in University District. So that's kind of how this panel came to be, to sort of talk about the books that are in the community and what we can do to kind of lower that disparity of books. Because I'm sure all of you who are here might have bookshelves that are overflowing in books, and a lot of you don't read them anymore. And it'd be great to help others who may not have the same kind of books build their libraries. And that's what the Little Free Library movement is all about. So, and in the process, I met Mary Catherine Harrison, who about the same time had similar ideas about increasing access to books for children in the community. And she started an organization called RX for Reading Detroit. And they work to also distribute gently used books in the community. They're putting them in low-income dental and health clinics and Head Starts, in schools, and creating libraries. So we're kind of doing very similar work. She's also working with a Little Free Library, and she's at University of Detroit, Mercy, and she's a professor there. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mary Catherine Harrison.
Thank you so much, Kim. I was delighted to be asked to come and moderate this panel, in part because Kim is just so amazing. She's a powerhouse. You don't say no to her. And her work with Detroit Little Libraries has been so phenomenal. I mean, she says, oh, we've planted 150 like it's no big thing. Each of those libraries is a huge addition to its neighborhood, to the people in its direct vicinity who can come in and take books from it. You've all seen them, right? Well, there's one. That's one that's outside of Cabrini Clinic in Corktown, and they are really magical additions to neighborhoods. They look like little birdhouses for books. And Kim and her husband have actually dug the holes for quite a few of those, which I know from experience is really challenging work. So that's just an amazing thing to be part of and to be connected to. And so I've been thrilled to be partners. RX for Reading has distributed over 30,000 children's books in Detroit since 2014. And what we know is that the research shows that the number of books in a children's home has a huge impact on their educational future and their ability to become readers and to love reading and to fall in love with books. Every single book makes an impact. But what we also know, as Kim mentioned, is that in many homes, access to books is a luxury item. If you're focusing on having healthy food, on safe water, on having a place for your children to be safe, books become something that might not be part of that family budget. So what we're thinking about in this panel, one of the things that we're focusing on is what does it mean for Detroit to be a book desert, which is defined, obviously it's drawing on the language of a food desert, a neighborhood that does not have adequate access, adequate universal access to reading material and books. And so our incredible speakers today are all touching on that in different ways in their work. They're part of literacy, reading, storytelling, access, and they're going to bring their own backgrounds and work to bear on our conversation today. And then what we're very much hoping is that all of you will be willing to ask questions, but also share your ideas, share your observations about this moment in Detroit and what we can be doing as a community. And I think the basic premise is that it is a community responsibility that each one of us can contribute to increased access for all of our citizens in our city and the surrounding areas. So with that, if I could just say thank you to Kim for organizing this and for all of the work that she's done. Thank you to MOCAD for hosting it. And most importantly, thank you for coming out on a Saturday that's beautiful. I mean, springtime is finally here. So we're really grateful that you're going to spend part of your Saturday with us. With that, I'm going to introduce our three panelists, and I think I'm going to introduce everybody, and then we'll come up, we'll do the three talks, and then we'll have a really good conversation afterwards, after they've shared their ideas. So Nell Duke, who's closest to me, is a professor of literacy, language, and culture, and the combined program in education and psychology at University of Michigan. Her research, which is award-winning research, focuses on early literacy development, particularly among children living in poverty. Much of her work focuses on bridging gaps between research and practice. So, in recent years, she's worked on how to support teachers as they use project-based learning to develop informational reading and writing skills. Duke and her collaborators also work on promoting literacy in the preschool years in particular, and we know that birth through 5 is the most critical time of brain development and also development of pre-literacy skills in terms of raising lifetime readers, even before they can read. I always say that if a baby is chewing on a book, that's the best sign. They're going to be a reader when they grow up. So she's published things like the book Beyond Bedtime Stories, A Parent's Guide to Promoting Reading, Writing, and Other Literacy Skills, and developed a workshop series called Engaging Families in Children's Literacy Development, which you can actually get on Amazon. She's going to be talking today on the topic Books and Beyond, Supporting Early Literacy Development. Our next speaker is Ethriam Cash Brammer. He is a Chicano writer and scholar from El Centro, California. He holds a doctorate in English from Wayne State University, and I'm an English professor, so of course he's my people. And he has been serving at Wayne State as Associate Director of the Center for Latino and Latin American Studies. He's very recently accepted a new position that I'm very excited about as Director of the Federal TRIO Student Support Services Program at Eastern Michigan University. And if you don't know about the TRIO program, it's one of the most important national programs for access and support in higher education. So he focuses on everything from our youngest children to college students. Dr. Brammer is also a translation scholar. He's translated a number of early U.S. Latino literature, and he is also the author of two fantastic bilingual children's books, My Tata's Guitar and The Rowdy Rowdy Ranch. Those are the English titles. He can tell you the Spanish ones. And I will add that Ethriam is a passionate advocate for increasing children's literacy, and he's been really involved in efforts to support programs like El Dia del Niño, El Dia del Libro, which you're going to talk about today, right? And I'm excited because I haven't even told you this. RX for Reading is going to be providing 1,000 books for the event, which is on April 30th, that children can choose from. And he's also active in Prime Time Family Reading Time. And both of those programs are supported by the American Library Association. And Ethriam's talk today is called Leer entre Familia, Community-Based and Family-Centered Literacy Strategies in Latino Detroit. Finally, Satori Shakoor on the end is an artist, storyteller, veteran of live performance, and a social entrepreneur. She's one busy woman. She was a singer with Parliament Funkadelic for the fans in the house, and is one of the brides of Funkenstein. Stein, sorry. I should know that. She is an award-winning actor, stand-up comedian, produced playwright, and published author. Satori is the catalyst of the founding member of Obsidian Theatre Company in Toronto. She is a Moth storyteller and host for fans of that show, and she's the artistic director and producer of the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers, a live curated storytelling event held monthly at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. And I just have to say that this month's event was last night. And so that this woman organized, led, hosted, it was just this phenomenal part of that event, and is here today is astounding. Thank you so much for coming out. And Satori serves as the executive director for the nonprofit that runs those events at the museum. So please welcome all of our speakers, and we will get started.
Good morning. I'm so grateful to Kim for this original invitation, and to be on this distinguished panel is quite something. And we're talking today about my absolute favorite topic, literacy, so that's great as well. I'm going to focus today on what it is that children learn from books and other interactions with the written word. And I'm going to start with, like any proud mama, a video of my daughter, which will start soon. Nay, nay, said the horse. Want to go for a ride? The spider didn't answer. She was very busy spinning her web. Moo, moo, said the cow. Want to eat some grass? The spider didn't answer. She was very busy spinning her web. Ba, ba, bleated the sheep. Want to run in the meadow? The spider didn't answer. She was very busy spinning her web. Ma, ma, said the ghost. Want to jump on the rocks? The spider didn't answer. She was very busy spinning her web. Oink, oink, grunted the pig. Want to roll in the mud? The spider didn't answer. She was very busy spinning her web. Woof, woof, barked the dog. Want to chase the cat? The spider didn't. So, of course, I love seeing my daughter back when she looked at me with great admiration and love. She's a teenager now. Doesn't have quite the same attitude toward me, but partly that's cute, but partly it shows us some of what books do for kids. So obviously there's joy and there's an attachment, a connection between the reader and the child, but there's also some learning going on about print. So I don't know if you noticed that when I had was paused between pages, after a while she turned her head over to where the book was and she tried to lift it up a little bit. It shows that she's beginning to understand that the words that are coming out of my mouth are actually coming from this thing I'm holding, a book. So she's beginning to understand or develop the very early stages of something that we call concepts of print. And concepts of print are just basically how print works and how books in particular work. And concepts of print are one of the things that we're trying to develop in children, if at all possible, before they come to kindergarten, so that by the time they reach kindergarten and they start instruction there, that they already know a lot about how print works. And I'm going to give you just a few examples of different concepts of print we try to develop. So the first thing I want to do is to talk about the door hinge. So even in this artsy crowd, I'm going to make a guess that if any of you who went and used the restroom did not pay any attention to the door hinge, right? But I'm going to also guess that most of you paid attention to the sign on the door that indicated the gender that was preferred for that restroom. This is because we've been socialized over time to think that the door hinge is probably not as important as those words and symbols. So we live in a very literate environment that privileges the role that print and symbols play. And kids aren't born with that, right? When you're born, that door hinge is equally interesting and equally important to you as is the sign on the door. You learn over time in a literate world that that sign on the door matters more than that door hinge. And that's one of the concepts of print. So when we surround kids with books, one of the things that we're communicating to them are various things that print does and that books do. Another concept of print is called directionality. So if you were walking from point A to point B, I would venture a guess that most of us would think the logical way to walk that would be in that diagonal line, straight from A to B, right? But when we read, that's not at all how we approach it. We actually don't walk diagonal, so to speak. We go straight across, and when we get to the end of the line, instead of just turning around and coming back the other way, right, we actually stop and start all the way back at the beginning, one line down, and so on. And that process of understanding that print kind of works in a weird way is a form of concept of print. It's a direction. It's not intuitive. You would not be born knowing that the logical way to go from A to B is that, right? You have to learn that by being exposed to books and being exposed to readers. Similarly, if I hold up my cell phone, no matter how I hold this, you're going to agree it's a cell phone, right? But when we talk about letters, the way that you hold it, so to speak, where it's oriented, makes it a completely different letter. Think of B, D, P, Q, right? So it's unlike most things in our world, which are the same thing no matter its orientation. Letters are really weird because their orientation matters enough to define them. So these are all these things that very young children are learning when exposed to books and to print that are important to reading and that most people don't even think about. And all of this is culturally bound, right? So here is the MLK, I have a dream speech written in Arabic. In Arabic, we don't go left to right, top to bottom, right? We go right to left. So many of these concepts of print actually vary depending on the cultural community where you sit. I'm going to now shift to a different set of things that we learn from books. So you've heard about how we learn about concepts of print and how books work. So this little guy is going to show us a little bit more.
What story are we going to tell today?
About Jack.
Story about Jack and the beanstalk.
What the person that wanted Jack in my house?
But Jack was
Where
very...
is Jack? Don't have any food or any money.
So Jack's mother told him to...
Take a town to market and buy food.
But then...
Oh man, came up by him.
the old man asked Jack, "You selling that cow?"
That said yes.
Jack said yes. The old man said, "I don't have any,
Money or any food.
but I will give you."
I'm magic bean.
And Jack's...
And this goes on, but you get the basic point. So that child from books has begun to develop some vocabulary knowledge. So I would venture a guess that this child now knows, or at least is on his way to knowing the word market. How did he get that? He probably got that from hearing that book. He's also developing knowledge of story structure, of the idea that many stories, certainly not all, have a setup and characters or players and have a problem and have some sort of eventual resolution, and he does actually go through the whole story. So this is another set of things that books bring us, and again, this starts way before kids are necessarily reading conventionally. Another thing that kids learn from books and from print is about genre, about different purposes and types of reading and writing. So the texts I'm showing you here were written by a 3-year-old, and the 3-year-old said the first text is a shopping list, and she identified the second one as a story. So you can see that although she's 3 and she's not writing in a way that any of us would think of as conventional, she's already developed some genre knowledge. She already knows some things about how shopping lists are similar to and different than stories. This is from a first grader just about to enter first grade. And this child has written 4 texts, identifying the first as a birthday list, the second as a letter, the third is a map, and the fourth is a story page. Why don't you just turn and talk to the people around you about what you can see that she already knows about print? Sorry, this is a convention we use all the time in my field. There you go. Okay, if you could wrap up your conversations. So as I heard at least some chattering, there's a lot that she's already knows about literacy, from the details to the fact that a letter might be on stationery. You'll notice that with the map, she recognizes that there are different chunks of print that are embedded with the picture. Whereas in a story page, we typically, not always, but typically we'll see one check of text that's separate from the picture, and many other things. So this is a child who has learned so much from being exposed to books as well as to many other kinds of print. We're going to see another contribution that books make from this.
Oh, look, it's sometimes, is it this one? There's two of them on there. It looks like a bumblebee. That looks like a bumblebee, but it's called Narcissus bulbfly. They look like bees, but they don't sting.
Oh, I see one.
You see one? What is it? Is it a bumblebee?
No.
Let's look at the picture. Which one is your favorite? Is it the ant
I like.
or the bee? Bee go bee, buzz, bzz.
I like body.
4 butterflies?
Yeah, I like butterfly. Like 3.
Like 3?
Yeah.
3 or 4?
3.
3 butterflies. 1, 2, 3. This one's pretty.
I like all of them.
You like all of them? There's 4.
I like all of butterflies.
All butterflies.
So that child has developed world knowledge about, in this case, the natural world and insects, through books. And this is another important contribution that books make. And one of the reasons that when we provide books to kids, we want to include storybooks, but we also want to make sure that we include factual books or information books so that children can develop their world knowledge. Another way that books support children is through social emotional development. So I've given 3 examples on the screen here of books that we've used to try to help preschoolers to just develop their own social emotional skills. So the feelings book, which really helps them to recognize and name their feelings. Swimmy, which is, if you haven't read it, by the way, I highly recommend all 3 of these books, but Swimmy really helps us learn about how teamwork and uniting can support our development. And then Abiyoyo Returns is a book that really engages kids in a lot of thinking through different kinds of problem solving that they can do in their social interactions. Identity development is another important way that books can support us. So providing books for children that allow them to learn about the history of their community, providing books that allow them to learn about their neighborhood, their community, and the world beyond. But books are not the only tool, and even though we're sort of book-centric here today, and that's understandable, I do want to just point out some other ways in which parents can develop and families and communities can develop literacy. This clip, I think, illustrates this very well, the rich literacy interactions that are occurring in this case around a cell phone.
That many children see happening on a regular basis. In this clip, notice how Jose helps Angel be a part of the writing process, both by typing what Angel says and allowing Angel to do some of his own typing. Then, take a look at how Jose uses a photograph to help Angel tell a story.
Ok, vamos a mandar un mensaje. Ahí. Mensaje corto. ¿Qué quieres decir a mami?
Tú decides.
Ok, vamos a escribir a mami. Mami, estamos... Oh, aquí es corregir. Estamos en casa. ¿Qué más?
¿Dónde está una U, papi? ¿Dónde está una U?
¿Una U?
Sí.
Ahí está.
Acá.
A. U. Ahí, muy bien.
Oh, tienes que corregir.
Ok, ahí.
¿Dónde?
¿Quieres borrar la U?
Solo la U.
Ok, ya.
azul.
¿Qué quieres decir?
Casa azul.
En la casa azul, otra U. Ahí está.
Casa azul.
Azul. Y ahora la L. ¿Te queremos mucho?
Esas son las únicas palabras de mi escuela.
¿Sí?
Te queremos mucho.
¿Te queremos mucho?
Sí.
Oh, mira.
So what you're seeing there is there's no book involved, right? This is a cell phone, but that child is developing tremendous literacy knowledge from that interaction with his dad around letters and sounds and spelling, and you see how quickly the dad referenced a correction, and then shortly after the child said, we need to make a correction, right? So you can see all that learning that's occurring for this preschool child, a very advanced preschool child, but a preschool child. And in our book, Beyond Bedtime Stories, we're actually trying to get at this idea that we need to stop telling parents, read to your kids, read to your kids, read to your kids. Yes, that's one valuable activity that we can do, but it may not fit into the lives of all families, and there are many other ways that we can develop literacy and many other ways that we can support literacy. As Mary Catherine mentioned, we've developed a workshop series. I make no money from this, so I don't want you to think I'm promoting it for that reason, but we've developed a workshop series that we've made available nationally. That's a workshop for parents in 5 parts, 5 2-hour workshops. And we include reading books to kids, but we don't emphasize it. We really talk about a wide variety of things that families can do that fit into their homes and communities to promote literacy. So we start with the idea that every family has literacy going on in their homes already. Storytelling is very powerful for literacy. The recipe on the back of the brownie mix is powerful for literacy development. There's already tons of print in every home, even homes that are not considered literate by some people's standards. And then we go on to talk about different parts of the home and ways that we can promote literacy in every part, even the bathroom, but that doesn't go in the direction that you might be worried it goes in. It's really mainly about the bathtub and the shower and how we can promote literacy there. In each one of our sessions, we have a meal and social time that we start with. And then we welcome families and do an introduction to the night's topic. At that point, we separate the kids from the grown-ups, and the kids go and do their own literacy activities, and the grown-ups stay with the community organizers or facilitators. And they watch video clips of real families engaging in literacy supportive activities with that night's theme, so for example, in the kitchen, and talk about them. Then they give an activity overview of all the literacy activities that will be available for the rest of the workshop. And then their kids come back with them and they engage in these activities together. And that engagement is really a powerful opportunity for the facilitators or community organizers to work with the families to support them in literacy development. Here's just an example. So on the kitchen night, one of the choices of activities they can make is around concepts of print. They can either read and follow a very simple recipe together, or they can look at books about food and use pointers to try to track the print properly from left to right. So that's the kind of thing that goes on in our 5-part workshop series. And what we have found is that parents who participate in the workshop series actually increase not only their interactions around things like texting on a cell phone together or cooking together in the kitchen and reading recipes and that kind of thing, but they actually also do read to their kids more. So we get to the end result of reading more books to kids, but we get there by also honoring these many, many other literacy supportive activities that can occur in the home. And we found as well that children benefit. So children whose families participated in 5 2-hour workshops in a study we did that included families in a large urban district in Michigan, we can't say where, and in another district in Minnesota, actually scored higher in their development of language knowledge, their understanding of print and words, and in their comprehension. So this suggests that working with families to incorporate more literacy and build on the literacy and language activities already occurring in their homes can be very, very positive. I'm going to leave you with one last video that I think kind of exemplifies the goal that we have to develop in all children a great and profound love of books.
In the summer, I like to lie in the sun and watch the birds. And I like to watch the frogs in the pond. Then I curl up in my hollow tree and dream about spring. The end. I am a bunny. My name is Nicholas. I live in a hollow tree. In the spring, I like to pick flowers.
Muchísimas gracias a todos. Thank you, everybody. I especially wanted to thank Kim and Amy and Augusta for the invitation and the whole MOCAD staff for making this available. I didn't bring a video of my child. I actually brought my child. And like the baby, she's the one that stereotypically reads in the midnight, right? And our biggest disciplinary problem with her is to get her to stop reading, right? So I think she totally empathizes with the little baby. But back is he? So I also wanted to thank my panelists and especially Mary Catherine. I'm trying to find. ¿Quieres presentar conmigo? ¿Sí?
Sí.
Oh, bueno. Well, this wasn't planned, but we'll go with it. All right, where did I start? The view? Oh, slideshow.
Yeah. There you go. Just view slideshow.
Okay.
Perfect.
So, leer entre familia, a straight translation would be to read among your family, right? A better idiomatic translation would be to read with family or to read as a family. And so I'm going to be talking about community-based and family-centered literacy programs that I've been involved in since moving to Detroit. I'm especially thankful for Catherine and her introduction because she really identified some of the issues that we tried to address when starting programs like El Día del Niño, El Día del Libro, and Primetime Family Reading Time here in Detroit. And so one of the big needs is just addressing the low educational attainment in the city of Detroit, right? And so Michigan, the high school dropout rate is actually relatively high when you look at national, right, statistics. And so even at 89.3%, high school graduation rate is a little low. It's lower in Wayne County still. When you pull out communities like Grosse Pointe and Northville and Dearborn, and you just focus on Detroit, you have a 77.8% high school graduation rate. There's a direct correlation between educational attainment and poverty. And so if you look at poverty rate, this is interesting. Again, you have to kind of look at Wayne County in a different way because if you look at Wayne County just by its as a county, it actually has a lower poverty rate than the statewide average. And again, you'd ask, why is that the case? Well, because Grosse Pointe and Dearborn and some of these near-ring Plymouth, near-ring suburbs are included in Wayne County. If you look at Detroit in isolation, right, you see what the real critical need is. And so as the high school dropout rate decreases, poverty rates increase. And so families with children under 18 in Detroit, 1 in 2, basically. 1 out of every 2 families in Detroit with children in the house are below the federal poverty line. And so I like to look, of course, at languages other than English. Wayne County is interesting for that because if you look at the near suburbs, you have a lot of immigrant communities, often well-educated, right, families, particularly Asian immigrant families, right, living in the near-ring suburbs, doctors and lawyers and professionals. What I focus on, of course, is Latino community, Southwest Detroit. And so those are different communities. They speak languages other than English, which is, certainly an asset. But the way of addressing, right, their literacy needs might be a little bit different. there's not really good data on adult literacy rates. And so my next slide is going to kind of address that. But Wayne County in general, right, has a higher adult literacy rate than the state. We don't have good data around Detroit. And so one thing I wanted to do is kind of demystify. There's this thing out in the public discourse that says that basically 1 in 2 adults in Detroit are functionally illiterate, right? Has anybody heard that, read that? Yeah? That's actually become much more of a controversy. The group that published it hasn't really given anybody access to the methodology or any of the data, and then functionally illiterate, we're not sure even how that's defined, right? But we can say with some certainty that the adult illiteracy rate in Detroit is higher than you might imagine for the state or national, right? But 47% seems a little bit of a stretch, right? So in Southwest Detroit, which is where I mostly do my work and research and community building kind of projects, everything is kind of done in the family, right? There's a sociological term for this, familismo, right? Basically, this is why my daughter feels comfortable coming up here and presenting as a family, right? Everything's kind of done in the family and family-based. And so if you're going to address on a large scale Latino educational attainment, you need kind of a family structure to do it. And thankfully, we came on some really good ideas. One of the first ones was primetime family reading time, right? It was a program that was developed in Louisiana originally. I was part of the state's team that was sponsored by the Michigan Humanities Council to go down to Louisiana, like twist my arm to go to New Orleans, right? Go to New Orleans. There's a lot of comparisons that are always being made between Detroit and New Orleans, right? Fairly or not, wrongly or rightly. But there's a great literacy program in New Orleans that got kind of scaled out to Louisiana statewide, and then the American Library Association picked up on it. And basically, it's this idea that families should read together, right? Very novel concept. When you're dealing with impoverished families, as Mary Catherine said, you're dealing with food deserts and book deserts and all these sort of complications together. And primetime, what's wonderful about that is it tries to address them all at the same time. And so just like Nell's technique, primetime builds in food, right, as part of the strategy. And so every time that you have a primetime evening, it includes feeding the whole family. Right? And so trying to address the food needs of a family, the nutritional needs of the family. There's actually speakers that will talk about, right, in a food desert, how do you get access to good food? My entry into El Día del Niño, El Día del Libro is the fact that I was chair of the Visas Nuevas Head Start committee. Right? And so we're dealing with all of these issues in early childhood development. So how do you get access to healthcare? How do you get access to immunizations? How do you get access? Those kinds of talks happen in prime time, which is designed as a literacy program, right? So you're actually helping the entire family and addressing the entire family's needs, or as many of the needs as you can, while you have them as a captive audience. You're feeding them, you're having these conversations, you're modeling what it looks like, right? In tandem or simultaneously, you're addressing the literacy needs of the parents and the children at the same time, right? And so my role as a humanities scholar was to do some of the readings, do some of the storytelling, unpack some of the literature, but mostly just model, right, for the parents in the room. How do you read to your kids, right? How do you get them excited? And so primetime puts books in the hands of children because of these ratios, right, that Kim talked about before. Children simply don't have a lot of books in their house. And when you have to decide between meeting your basic needs of food and shelter and clothing, the book kind of slides in the priority list. And so putting books in people's hands, getting them fed, and getting them important sort of social networking supports, right, is kind of the model of prime time. And so when I was asked to go to Louisiana and bring it back, I was pretty much charged originally with getting this going in Southwest Detroit. And so the Bowen branch, right, and the Campbell branch, we got 2 programs going, and Primetime has multiple curricula. So the one that we implemented in Southwest Detroit, the most appropriate, were actually bilingual books, right? So it was a bilingual, bicultural intervention. The other misconception is that, especially with maybe English as a second language or English language learner families, is that they're not literate. Well, they might not be literate in English, but they can certainly use their literacy in their other language other than English to build upon. And so it was empowering the parents, right, who are receiving sort of these negative messages about their own literacy, empowering them that, yes, the fact that you're literate in Spanish is helpful, right? And so let's work on your literacy in English, but absolutely use your literacy in Spanish to teach your children. They'll learn the English in school, but you can still be a good model for reading. And so, like I said, I was chair of Vistas Nuevas Head Start, which is one of the largest Head Starts, not just in Detroit, but in the nation. And so as much as we were talking about immunizations and all those kinds of early childhood development issues, one thing that I'm not a big supporter in general of standardized testing and all these kinds of things, so a little disclaimer. But one thing that the sort of standardized testing data did teach us was our children, and there's about 2,000 of them, right, that are being serviced by Vistas Nuevas Head Start, weren't meeting their literacy benchmarks, right? And so I was thankful for the testing to teach us that, and because that's what started the conversation, right? So just like with immunizations, we're meeting all of our targets and our goals with immunizations, we're meeting all of our targets and goals with dental visits and things like that. But we weren't meeting our goals in terms of childhood literacy development. And so it started the conversation. So how do we address this need, right? And one of the needs that we identified is that the families didn't have books in their house, right? And so how do we get books in their house? Well, again, we're dealing with low-income families, so let's give them books, right? Let's make it fun. Let's give it to them. And so as a result, the Consulate of Mexico and Matrix Human Services, which is the umbrella service organization in which Vistas Nuevas Head Start was embedded, and Wayne State University through the Center for Chicano Boricua Studies, was what it was called at the time. We were the original 3 partners to create a large community organization collaboration to have a festival, basically a festival of reading. In Mexico, we don't just celebrate Mother's Day and Father's Day, we also celebrate Children's Day, right? And so El Día del Niño is always April 30th, right? It's coming up. And so how do you leverage a cultural celebration, right, with literacy as one of its goals? And so El Día del Niño, El Día del Libro was born in Detroit, right? The photos right there on your left is the very first year. One of our critical partners that year was Holy Redeemer Church, right? And so the bishop, the Archbishop of Detroit was very supportive, but also the parish of Most Holy Redeemer. It started maybe 500, 600 people in the parking lot of Holy Redeemer Church. It was in April in Michigan, and so you can imagine what the weather was like. It was a miserable day with 50-mile-an-hour winds. One of our tents actually blew away, right? And it was probably one of the most beautiful moments I had ever experienced in that Southwest Detroit community. People bringing out their children despite the terrible weather, despite all of the complications, just to celebrate children and celebrate reading. We grew out of that space the very first year, right? And so since then, it's been held at Clark Park, right? and generally gets about 5,000 people, right? About 1,000 families come out. And so, I was very happy to hear that Mary Catherine's going to be offering books, and that's what it is. Every child that comes in gets pretty much as many free books as they can handle, as they can put in their bags and they can take home with them, because we have so many different generous partners that bring those books out. So here in Detroit, we're now in our 8th year. One thing that I brought to the team was actually connection with the American Library Association. And Pat Mora, she's a personal friend. We have the same publisher, right? Arte Público Press. So we publish children's books through the same publisher. She's a friend, and I brought her out, I think it was maybe year 2 or year 3, as the keynote speaker. And I found out that she basically goes to these all over the country, right? She's kind of the national spokesperson. When she came to Detroit, she was blown away. She said, Los Angeles, San Antonio, San Francisco, New York City, Detroit had a bigger El Día del Niño, El Día del Libro celebration that was better organized than some of the biggest cities in the country with largest critical masses of Latino families. She said what we did here in Detroit was amazing and was bigger and better and it became a national model. And she, through the American Library Association, used it as a model to disseminate nationally. And so we were very, very excited about that. And so I did want to invite you. I'm always promoting. I'm not on the committee anymore, but I'm always promoting the event. April 30th from 11:30 to 3:30, and that's what we get. Clark Park, just tables and tables full of books for children. And I'm very proud that it continues to go on. And then there is a clip. It's from Pat Mora's little website. I'm going to make sure I find it. But that kind of exemplifies what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
Now it's time for some sweet Scooter dessert. Think she's going to be able to have Scooter for dessert, huh? Let's go. Where do we leave off? He was eating Granny. All right. Come back here, he honked. They hit top speed over 2 tall hills. Tank inched closer and closer and closer. Crashing headlong into Jumbo Jim's junkyard. Oh, do come in, my precious little red, crackled Tank in his best granny voice.
And so, just very quickly, that's the point, right? My daughter has 2 college professors for parents. You don't have to be a college professor to read to your kids. You don't have to do it in a library, and you don't have to do it at school. We can give books to children, give them an opportunity to read. We can read everywhere, and we can encourage reading everywhere. And in the end, what you might be doing by just giving books, making books available in the little libraries, believe it or not, can actually break the cycle of poverty, right? In the end, when people are more literate, they do better in school, right? They attain higher levels of education, and that's one of the keys to breaking the cycle of poverty. And so just your donations of books can have that kind of power. And so I appreciate all of you for listening to me today and for all the wonderful work that you're doing, donating these books and making them accessible to children. Thank you so much.
Well, is it still morning? Good morning. My name is Satori Shakoor, and I just want to thank Kim for your passion, your love, your vision, and your commitment to reading and books. And Mary Catherine for moderating in the panel. I think this is a very powerful forum here, and I want to thank everybody for coming to hear about books and reading. I am a storyteller, and Mary Catherine has gotten me into this PowerPoint thing, so if whatever I'm saying don't go with the pictures, I want to start by saying, first of all, I don't do the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers by myself. I have an amazing production team and a support of growing community. And I guess that's what I want to point out today in the story I'm going to tell you about community. A friend of mine, Theo Parrish, who is an international selector and DJ, said, in the 21st century, if you can't read, you will die. And integrity, Webster's dictionary says that integrity is the state of being whole, complete, unbroken, unimpaired, sound, and in perfect condition. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and my neighborhood, my community, my block had integrity. We had to go down, every time we went down the street, we had to say hi to everybody who happened to be on their porch. Hi, Miss Barksdale. Hi, Miss Miles. Hi, Miss Ann. Hi, Miss Green. Hi, Miss Cortez. Hi, Miss Hernandez. Hi, Mr. Miles. Hi, Mr. Littlejohn. Hi, Mr. Jones. Hi, Mr. And if we missed somebody when we got home, my mother said, you didn't say hi to Miss Jones. Go down there and say hi to Miss Jones. Hi, Miss Jones. It was a community. We had old people and young people and every kind of we saw people living. The old people would sit on their porches and watch the neighborhood. Somebody was on this street, I don't know who they was. And so everybody got together. When I did something in school that I wasn't supposed to do, the principal walked me from the school. I went to Monteith Elementary on Jefferson and Hibbert. He walked me all the way from the school to my street on Fisher, to my porch, told them what I did, and then my parents took over. Everybody had integrity. In 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated, but at that time in the country, the entire country held reading, education at a high value. President Kennedy had the program on physical fitness, so in the schools you had to do pull-ups and push-ups. So I'm physically fit now as part of my lifestyle, reading Fun with Dick and Jane, even though the Dick and Jane and dad, father, and brother were white, so what? I was learning how to read. I didn't have a Spot, but I knew Spot was a dog, and reading became my access to power. We had a library in our neighborhood, and we would just walk to the library. It seemed like a long way away with our little tiny legs. We could check out 5 books. I would go home, and I would read the books, and we would return them back. But my friend Vendella, one day she said, and she was younger than me, books with pictures is for little babies. And she showed me the section where there were no pictures in the book, and I started to read, and my imagination started to be stimulated, and I started to want to go to Egypt and be an archaeologist. I wanted to go to Greece, and I wanted to see the pyramids, and it was taking me outside of my classroom, outside of my neighborhood, and I began to develop an appetite for something beyond my block. But I come from old people. My mother was 20 years younger than everybody in our family. This is my grandfather, and that's my aunt, who was born in 1900. She died in 2004 at 104. She was a school teacher. So if you think reading keeps you alive, that kept her alive, because she did crossword puzzles. She did Tiger baseball games, kept the score. She was always had a pencil behind her ear and something in her hand reading. And I watched that, and though they weren't educated, I was more educated probably in the 6th grade than the adults around me. Not wiser, not more experienced, but more educated. And when I did the spelling bee, they would help me with the words. I won the grade, I won the school, and I was runner-up in the city bee, and I missed on the word receive. I spelled it R-E-C-I-E-V-E, and for years I didn't know how to receive. Now I do. So it's R-E-C-E-I-V-E, and we are a nonprofit 501c3. Okay, but I digress. Okay, so in the 5th grade, the teacher, at maybe 10 or 15 minutes before the class was over, she would read a book to us. Not the whole book. Each day and she read Treasure Island. And when she read Treasure Island, I knew I wanted to be a writer of children's books. And I asked for a typewriter for Christmas. And then I won the contest for Father's Day. You had to write about your dad, and I wrote about my dad. But if you saw in the videos, and you saw an adult and a child, and there was reading happening between them. But what I noticed most was how the child was wrapped all around the adult, hands on the adult knee, all hugged up. And that's how it was with the storytelling. They couldn't read to me, but they would tell stories, and maybe because they weren't so educated, they were powerful storytellers. They could make me see what they were telling me. And I guess that's kind of like books, you know, they have stories and pictures in them, but they would give me that and I would be wrapped around them and my knees would be all, and it's like, so I got reading and love together. I got reading and touching close to an adult together. So when I go read now, I don't read that much books now. I have to go on vacation to like Jamaica where it's warm and feel like somebody all around me when I read it, but it's a pleasure. And then, you know, reading just became part of my culture, part of my lifestyle. Even when I was on the road with P-Funk and all that excitement, I would be backstage reading Stephen King, just to escape from, I guess, the excitement of Parliament Funkadelic. It was a reality, it was my world, but I wanted to, I guess, get scared out of my mind. I don't know. But Stephen King I read everything by Stephen King. I still read his own writing and all that. So storytelling is an access to power, vision, transformation, purpose. And when I go into the schools and I teach storytelling workshops to the children, when they see that their stories can move, touch, and inspire, they get a sense of their own power. Anybody with a story and can tell a story and make you see, then they have power. It doesn't matter how big or small or tall or older they are. And when you have a sense of your own power, then you can sit on a panel with doctorates. You can stand up wherever you are and feel good because you can make a person see and feel and think and be moved and touched and inspired. And if you can connect that sense of power with reading and writing, if you can direct that energy like that love energy, I think there may be something happening with that. Because our communities in Detroit, they're not communities, they're streets with abandoned houses, and there's a lack of integrity in community. Communities are designed to protect people, to love people, to grow people, to transform people, to deliver people as responsible citizens in contribution to your society. And when you're hungry, and when you're poor, and when you are denied access to resources, reading is the last thing you want to do. Everybody has experienced some sort of illiteracy if you've traveled anywhere. In Japan, I was illiterate. I had to do charades. You know, in Montreal, I couldn't speak French. After being there for about 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, I knew that fermé, I knew which bathroom was which bathroom, but you're limited, you're dependent upon others to tell you where to go, where to be, and that dependence translates into your psyche, into your spirit, into the way you be in the world. So reading, being able to be independent, to get information. I took my granddaughter when she was about 5 to a little bookstore over here on Lafayette and Bagley. And she picked a book on vegetables. I was like surprised. I said, you can get 2 books. She got one pleasure read and one about vegetables. And she read that book, and the next thing I know, she says, I'm a vegetarian, Grandma Satori, because I don't want to be fat and I can't move and I can't. And she got all that information and has changed the culture of her household. Her mother, they don't eat pork anymore. She's completely changed because they thought it was a fad. But no, she got that and she read that, and that's in her mind, and it will never, ever be out of her mind. She may go off and eat something, I don't know. But her basic foundation now, healthy food. Because the book, I don't know what the book informed her, didn't scare her, informed her. Inside of books are adventures. And inside of books are remedies. And inside of books are stories that deliver information and ideas. And storytelling is the most powerful and effective delivery system of information and ideas. So if we can't read, you don't even have to be able to read. You don't have to be literate to tell a story. Matter of fact, my family, as I share with you, they couldn't read that well. I was helping them when they would sit down with me and I would learn my words, spelling words, they were learning to spell better too. So it is a family thing. I'm glad that you're putting family, because community, that's what community is. It's an extended family. And when your mother is over in Grosse Pointe like mine was, being a maid 8 hours a day, then my stepmother was there pouring stories into my head, into myself. When my father couldn't take me to violin classes, Mr. Pittman took me. So where there was some fallout and some dropout, another community member, another family member filled in, so there was a continuity of love and purpose and ideas and forward-moving growth. My whole family was dedicated to us getting an education. Matter of fact, that's all they worked for. My mother carried big bags and got off the bus on Fisher Street, and she was tired at the end of the day. The last thing she wanted was all of us running up to her, Mama, guess what happened today? She was just so tired. But she worked for us, and we resented that she wasn't around. But she worked so that we could go to school, and I'm educated. I went to Michigan State University, University of Hawaii, Wayne State University, and I continued to keep myself. I don't have a doctorate. I just like learning. And finally, I thought, you know what? You should get a bachelor's, because you're just going to school and wasting your money. But I took classes I was attracted to. And I thought that if I'm going to pay for an education, I should pay for one that I want, not what they determine is a world-class education. Because when I went to Michigan State, a world-class education was one thing. When I went to school in Hawaii, you had to learn Asian studies to have a world-class education. So it's like a world-class education is sort of like random, maybe, and politically intently. So if I'm going to pay my own money, I'm going to take the classes that I'm most attracted to. So I guess in closing, I don't know, let me show you my family pictures, since this is my first PowerPoint. Oh, look at that. That's my father. He was born in 1900. He was a good father. I didn't appreciate him at the time. But the only reason I know about my father when he was younger is because the stories that were told. He was 54 when I was born. So I learned stories about my father. Your father would give somebody the shirt off his back, and I would always look when my father didn't have on his shirt in the summertime and look around and see who had on my father's shirt, because, you're literal, your dad is just crazy. One time a dog bit him, and he chased the dog down the street and bit the dog back. I was like, my father's badass. Your father could dance, man. He would take your auntie and throw her under his legs. They would be doing the jitterbug. What's the jitterbug, Miss Sadie? Oh, that's a dance they did at the Roseland Ballroom. And my father did all that? So that's how I learned about my father, through stories. And I'll never forget the stories. That's not my reality. I didn't experience that, but that's part of how I perceive my father. That's my mother. Oh. 2005, November 18th is when we buried her. My mother used to say, I may not be book smart, but I'm smart. My mother taught me how to live when she was dying. That's my sister. She took that about 6 months ago. She came out of her fat body. And look at her. That's my son. He died 9 months after my mother. He was in a car accident in 2001, suffered a brain injury and subsequent seizures that ultimately took his life. I have more pictures, but I didn't have time to send them. But I told the story of my mother and my son on the Moth Radio Hour. I don't know, do I have 5 minutes? Okay, I won't tell the story, but I told it on the Moth Radio Hour, and I was in Boston in 2012 in a sold-out theater, 900 people, and I was telling them the story of my son and my mother passing and what brought me out of grief. Ultimately, I felt like I wanted to live, which was my hormones. I was menopausal and my hormones were raging, and it was 6 years later, and it's like, this, it's a story. Go on the Moth Radio Hour, go on the Moth and listen to it. But it healed me. All the grief, all the stuff I was holding inside, I could put it out in the world, and I started getting letters, and people were saying, oh. And that's what brought me to create the Secret Society of Twisted Storytellers, to give anybody the opportunity, kids all the way up to 85, the opportunity to come and tell your personal story, because in the wisdom of that experience is some information, something for someone else. That can heal or put somebody in touch with, enlighten someone else, and that's what that's for. And so next month we have Monumental Mothers, and we have writers, authors on the show, Desiree Cooper. We have Poet Laureate Naomi Long-Madgett. We have Candace Fortman. And so I want to present monumental mothers who can write and who can read and who have become great people in the city of Detroit. And I thank you for listening to my story. I don't know whether I've done what you asked of me, but I thank you for letting me remember my family to you today and my community. Thanks.
Wow. I think you'll all agree that those talks, while they each had their own identity and core, they really spoke to each other because they were all thinking about the power of story, the power of books to transform individual lives, families' lives, and communities. And so what I'm hoping we can do as a group, we've got about a half an hour, and I'd love to hear your questions for our panelists. If you want to share your own stories of becoming readers, what books or what stories, because I think one of the themes is that books matter, but they're not the whole picture, and there are many ways of us becoming literate and engaging in stories and learning that go beyond books. So if you want to talk about your own experience becoming a reader, a consumer of stories or a teller of stories, or ask questions for any of our incredible panelists to get their experience and their knowledge, that would be wonderful.